face.
I know, likewise.
So we lied and we said that we were gonna take a break for 2 months.
We didn't lie.
We didn't break.
That's true. That's true. We told the truth. But then we had to, and then we were dealing with these sociopaths and was like, hold up. 1 second. We got a commentary on this. Okay, the first thing that I just need to say, I need to acknowledge, hello, I see someone is there. Give us some energy in the chat and let us know like where you're from. We're going to talk about this whole situation with Roe v. Wade. But before that, I just want to acknowledge that this week a victory was had for Black women and girls throughout the land of these United States, as an enemy of Black women was sent to jail for 30 years, Mr. Robert Kelly. And let me just say this, fuck R. Kelly. I just need to say that.
We can't say it. It's the internet.
I can't say that.
Kelly and the click he came. Hell yeah, fuck him.
I'm like, why we can't say that? I was very confused.
When the whole thing first happened, when that video, that series came out, I was so angry and I just wanted to say that. And I was like, oh, just trying to do the respectability psychologist thing. And the more and more that I learned how harmful he was, I always knew he was problematic. But the more I understood him, the only thing that I can say that I think is appropriate for him is fuck him. And I'm glad he's going to jail for 30 years.
And the thing that always just like is scary to me is that you have women defending him, because Erykah Badu came out and defended him. I had to just like, oh, okay, now I'm looking at her sideways. People come and tell me about her. I was like, I'm not listening to her music. I'm not supporting her, because she put the blame on the women and girls, and so I can't.
Yeah.
And I think watching that series, like I had a lot of questions about how all these girls, he had access to all these girls over time. And after I watched the series, I think I got through, it was like 6 episodes and I got through 4 and then I just couldn't take it anymore. Yeah. What I realized is I was like, oh, this could happen to anybody, because he was such a calculated predator and he had so many people assisting him. It was, I think I thought it was problematic that people were blaming the girls and blaming the parents, because it literally could have happened to anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what's really dangerous about him, is that it really was an enterprise. It was a predatory enterprise. And so the folks that he had working for him, all of them need to be prosecuted, because they were, absolutely complicit and agreeable. And I know some have testified against him now, but it really was a predatory enterprise. And also those women were trapped, like they were not even able to live freely and safely. And really, I think the harm in calling yourself the Piper and prioritizing young girls who really just wanted to be able to go after a dream, kind of the innocence and the beauty of wanting to dream is I think that's equally as harmful as him being the sexual predator that he was.
Yeah, because he was basically a destroyer of dreams,
Exactly.
And I think it is, in terms of happening to everyone or anyone, we really need to talk to our young girls about travel. I know Dr. McCray does a lot with, traveling. And I know Corrie talks a lot about African-American people traveling. That's something that, just a basic thing that you would think that people will know. Have a return ticket home. Have your own money. Don't let anybody make those choices for you. That's just like a simple thing that, unfortunately, a lot of young girls don't know or understand.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that we should make sure we always keep public conversations from the womanist perspective, from the feminist perspective, Black feminist perspective, front and center. Because when we say we can't believe people defended R. Kelly, I look at some of the people who are close to me who were defending R. Kelly. And I realized that there are layers of silence around the feminist perspective, from the Black feminist womanist perspective, particularly in certain communities. And I actually had to work out, like, so how do we have these conversations amid, say, for instance, families and communities that are what I labeled in my head evangelical feminists, right? Because or evangelical womanists, because let me just say, honestly, the women in my family, very strong, really advocates in terms of the baby boomers and younger of women being independent, having careers, having businesses. But I had to, when I looked at some, conversations we were having, some mistakes that maybe we make as women, the conversation around sexuality is very much buried. And I think that is a part of the, evangelical part, right? So, and I was like, this, I got this weird, I inherited this weird, I shouldn't say weird, but an interesting, quirky brand of evangelical feminism from the baby boomer women in my family. And I think we needed to have that conversation, because I think we don't have, being evangelical, growing up in an evangelical church, we're told dress this way, comport yourself this way. And we're not having the conversations about, well, if you show up in a miniskirt, doesn't R. Kelly type have the right to prey on you?
No.
Right? We don't have those conversations. So, yeah.
And I think one of the things that we also don't uplift enough is, like, we know this because we've had this experience and we've seen this in our own lives, those Black women that go and handle their business when girls are harmed. We sometimes talk about the ones that will blame girls, but just those Black women, like I don't even remember the mom, but remember the mom, if you saw the series, there was this one mom, she rolled up and she called the police and she said, I don't know what else is going on, get my daughter out of there. And she was consistent with that. Even when she went to California, her daughter was of age, but she went to California and she was determined that she was going to save her daughter. And all of us know we know lots of Black women that just have that perspective. And I don't think that gets uplifted enough, of those Black women that are just be down for the cause. And that mama didn't care if she was going to go to jail. She was going to save her daughter.
Right. And the Black men who step up as well, because I think that when you have strong fathers, strong brothers, strong uncles in your family and in your life, people know not to try stuff. And if they recognize, because, men can often recognize things of that nature, that they'll step in and make sure that they defend you. That's been my thing.
So now, taking that, I kind of want to shift us. I just needed to acknowledge that since Robert Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in jail. So I did want to just say that. I want us to talk about, like, where do we go here? Like, just thinking about, like, what's next. We all knew that eventually that Roe v. Wade was probably going to get overturned, particularly because there's sociopaths running the government. That's my non-official diagnosis, but we knew that this is problematic, and we knew that this is part of an orchestrated effort that has been a long time in the making. And so, Dr. McCray, I'm wondering from you as a historian, and then Nozibele, you just as an anthropologist, if you can kind of just put this conversation for us in context of looking at women, and particularly Black women's reproductive health and rights overall, historically, and from an anthropological perspective.
Okay, so I wish we could have my daughter in on this conversation, who is a PhD student in anthropology. She looks at Black women's reproductive health and women's larger, but she focuses on Black women's reproductive health. I do know from having conversations with her that, okay, Roe v. Wade is overturned. And we know, like you said, this has been a long time coming, because over the past few decades, states have been passing laws that make it either very difficult or almost impossible to get access to abortion. So we know what that's been looking like. And we know really, though, that it blocks the access to and limits the access to abortion for the most marginalized, vulnerable people in the society, which happen to be Black women, generally women of color, like Native women, BIPOC women, right? And women who are in poverty. And we know that more affluent women have long had access before Roe v. Wade to safe abortions, right? And so that's a part of the problem. And then the flip side is not just about abortion, it's about reproductive health. Like you said, I noticed you picked your words very carefully, because if we follow someone like a Fannie Lou Hamer and their story, we know it's complicated, because we also want to not be sterilized, right? Against our knowledge and wishes and will. And that kind of stuff is going on too. We're talking about bodily autonomy, and abortion rights is just one aspect of bodily autonomy. And that has been, often, like I said, denied and made difficult for marginalized women to obtain. But then you also said this is a long time coming. So the backlash that has culminated recently in the overturning of Roe v. Wade really appeared within a few years after the civil rights, the women's rights, the gay rights movements of the 1960s. And so we saw organized, actually some would point out, much more organized resistance to the gains of the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, the feminist movements, in the form of the rise of the new right by the 1970s. So much more organized lobbying, much more organized, even media, control of the media and dissemination of media. And so I asked, where do we go from here? I will take a page out of the, Black Power movement, the aspect of the Black Power movement that I study, cultural nationalists, when they say a part of what we do is organize, agitate, and educate, like we're doing now. But we've got to get much, much more organized.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it goes back into when we're talking about bodily autonomy, right? If you're going to look at it from an anthropological point of view, the woman's body is always been and has always been a site of social problems, right? They look at the woman's body as a social problem, something that needs to be solved. Right, from that perspective. Because if a woman has a baby and she doesn't, raise it in the proper way, going back to, the Moynihan report, then that baby is going to be problematic for society. So we have to control her body to make sure we don't have deviance in society. Or if you look at the other hand, like we talked about the alt-right, European women have to have babies to keep the race pure, to continue to populate the United States with good citizens. Because if the United States was one race, then this would be a whole different conversation about women's bodies. We always know that from the minute we stepped on these shores, African-American women did not have control over their bodies, most of them, because I hate to talk in terms of, absolutes. So when you look at that point, reproductive choices or reproductive health basically boils down to the society question: who has the right to control our bodies, and what does being a woman mean, right? So you look at, and I think it's kind of interesting when you look at the abortion debate, that there was a really good book written called Contested Lies by Ginsburg, and she's an anthropologist. And what she did was she went into a community in Fargo and she examined both sides of the debate. She talked to the people who were pro-choice and the people who were pro-life. And she found out that many of these women basically wanted the same things, but in different ways. And the main thing, the same thing that they wanted was to define what a woman was, right? So the pro-choice people tend to define women in terms of their ability to choose, their ability to make an income, whereas pro-life women define women in terms of their ability to procreate. And the bottom line is when they say, okay, a woman is someone who's able to procreate and nurture and have children, that's the definition of woman. When you don't do that, then you're going into the male territory, right? If you choose not to have a baby, if you choose to be independent, if you choose to say when and how and if you have a baby, that no longer marks you as a woman, because a woman is what? Someone who has a child, someone who raises that child and makes it a productive member of society. So those are just like some of the things that how you would look at it from an anthropologist's point of view. It has to do with who defines what a woman is. The woman's body is a site of a social problem that needs to be solved, by a man. And then we can also look at it in terms of economics and labor. So, there are a lot of different ways of looking at that problem from that perspective.
Estee, I want to come to you next, and then Thandi, I'm going to come to you from a journalistic perspective. But Estee, I know you got to leave early today, so So I'm going to try to be gentle, but I'm going to push on you from your Reverend. I want you to put your Reverend hat on today.
Okay.
And so you got to help me understand this from a Christian perspective, and particularly for folks that identify as Black, but then also identify as Christian. I saw this really interesting post this week. One of my colleagues, I don't know if you know, Dr. Reverend Brady Rayford.
I do.
Very progressive pastor. And so of course he's pro-choice, and he made a post that was essentially, saying that he was pro-choice, that women should have control over their reproductive health. And I saw someone comment, and he's graceful, so he didn't take the bait.
He's a really nice guy.
He's very nice. And so there was a woman that said, I thought you were a pastor. And he says, I am. And pastors have different perspectives on this. And she said, well, do you believe in the Bible? And he just ignored her comment. And I was like, go, because me, I want to jump in. And I'm always really curious about folks that identify as Christian and are anti-abortion, and kind of knowing the history of this country. How do they hold those two things, particularly as Dr. McCray said earlier, that we know that there's been a lot of harm that has happened to Black women, whether it be rape, incest, forced sterilization. So I wonder how people balance that. And I wonder if you can kind of give like us from the church perspective. And I'm not trying to be funny. I really do want to understand how people are conceptualizing, Black Christians are conceptualizing abortion.
Yeah, I really think a lot of what happens in Black Christianity in particular is that we walk a complex line between our experience of Christianity and our embedded theology, right? And when I say embedded theology, I mean the actual theological notions and premises that we kind of are inherently taught. And most Black Christians are Protestant. So I am going to speak from that perspective predominantly, even though we are not a monolith. I literally was raised in Catholic schools, and I know a gang of Black Catholics. So it's, but that isn't what we're thinking about when we're talking about evangelical Blacks or Black Christians in general, because those are not the dominant Christian group among African Americans. It's not Catholicism, but it is in conversation with Catholicism. So much of our embedded theology for Black Christians come from Methodist and Baptist theological polity, is what we call it, right? And that is because those were the missionaries that targeted slaves and that targeted the enslaved population and went from, plantation to plantation and, kind of attempted to quote unquote reform, educate, and convert these Africans to Christianity. Now that's complex because Africans had Christianity already, and the regions of those that were enslaved also were often Muslim and practicing indigenous practices. So there's a lot of pluralism when it comes to how we interpreted and experience the Christian perspective from an American Protestant indoctrination, right? And so a lot of that was in response to a Catholic perspective. Now, Catholics tend to be very strict and explicit around abortion in a way that Protestants are not. Also, Catholics are working with a different biblical text. They literally have different canonical texts, meaning those texts that are approved and included in what they would consider their Bible. And so in some of those texts, there are different verses, and there's also what they have, which is called catechism, which is why I'm like, this is very complex. In catechism, it's a way of interpreting what's in those texts to say, here's explicitly what our Pope, what our Vatican believes is the authority on these particular ways to interpret these texts. Protestants have none of that. So from a Catholic perspective, birth control is outside of what they believe to be a sacred way to live. So being pro-choice, being in a certain level of bodily autonomy for men or women is not considered to be the holiest way to live in general, right? Now, I think there are some Catholic theologians who are pushing up against some of the traditional catechisms, but it's a little wrapped up and tied up with the Bowen and Catholicism in a very different way. In Protestantism, you just don't really see those issues theologized in the same way, much to what Dr. McCray was saying. It's just not really talked about in the same way. So when these missionaries and when these preachers and when these pastors were bringing them Methodist and Baptist theologies, nobody was really talking about sex outside of reproduction. And sex outside of reproduction was important because Black women's bodies were site of reproduction for the economy. So there was a way that it was constructed from a Protestant perspective as a very holy act to reproduce. And that was really it, right? So we've embedded and inherited a perspective around reproduction that is very tied to holiness, that is not necessarily interrogated from a theological perspective, because there's also not a precedent for a need for that. So I'm saying a lot in a short amount of time, but what the bottom line is nobody's done that work. Even when you asked me earlier in the week to think about womanist theologies, there's just not a lot of writing about abortion in an explicit way. Lots of work on bodily autonomy, lots of work on the woman's autonomy, lots of work on women's ability to, make decisions for themselves outside of a church or man, a community, right? Lots of these kinds of texts that name the importance of reproductive health, but not necessarily a lot of textual conversation around abortion itself, because in the religious community, where the argument can go down a rabbit hole is, where does life begin? And that can become very contentious for people, because spiritually people feel very emotionally tied to whether or not they are ending a life. And I think that's true regardless of color, to be quite honest. In my experience in the field, I think that people really feel emotionally tied to their own ethical convictions around whether or not they have control over the ability of another life to be able to survive. And I think also for Black women, it is emotional because we've been sterilized, because we have been limited from the ability to birth and raise lives that we wanted. And because of the growing issues that I'm going to add. I haven't seen this, but so if you see it, let me know. But this is just really my own scholarly approach to it. I also think our challenges with infertility contribute to our perspectives around abortion, because in our faith, we feel a holy, sacred connection to the ability to be able to birth, give, and carry life, and to be able to sustain that life potentially outside of our bodies. And because of the harm that Black women have experienced in our sacred spaces, we have found a place there to be able to name that harm because of the holiness attached to that process, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's very complex for Black folks because we haven't been taught to theologize it in the first place. And we also haven't been taught how to be in conversation around interpretation, right? So it's difficult to know the difference between what we've learned and what actually is a biblical premise, because in our religious experience, it's all integrated. So biblically, there's nowhere in the Bible where it says life starts at conception and you can't end life at conception. There's not even language or a story or a narrative that would create an actual framework for that. It's all based on interpretation. But those interpretations are attached to these larger meta narratives that are historical.
Okay, so you just taught me something, because I just assumed, and this is how little I know about Christianity, I just assumed that period point blank, the idea was that if you were Christian, that you couldn't have an abortion. And so I just thought the people that were identified as Christian that were pro-life pro-choice, was them being radical and pushing against stuff. But I didn't know that there's no like universal. I knew about the Catholic Church, but for Protestants, I didn't know.
But that's where but that perspective, you're right, it comes from Catholicism. You see what I'm saying? So it being an absolute truth that never got challenged just transferred into Protestantism because it never got challenged. You see what I'm saying?
Movement-wise, it did too.
Yeah,
and look at the history of the movement. The pro-lifers started in the Catholic Church. Sorry.
Yeah, and the Catholic Church supported a lot of the pro-life organizations. I'm trying to remember the name of the main one. Right to Life. So in the beginning, Right to Life and the Catholics, they were hand in hand. And at one point, I think sometimes in the 70s, the Right to Life said that the Catholic Church was giving them a lot of money, so they wanted to have more control over what they, said in their platform. So they split, but the Catholic Church still continued to fund them. And that's how we have that set up, that life begins at quickening or it begins at the first trimester because of the involvement in the Catholic Church at the beginning.
I had no idea. See, that's why I stay in my lane. Okay. It's like I'm learning a lot.
It's really quite complex because it's kind of it's really left up to interpretation. But it's like with any other text, interpretation is usually most in conversation with the general consensus around the interpretation, not the text itself.
But this is also very, very theoretical and not necessarily practical. When you say Black Christians can't have abortion, of course they can have abortion. They've been having abortions. So maybe they might be in spiritual conflict, but there are Black Christian women who have had abortions.
Tons.
Yeah, but I want to push back on that, Tanya, a little bit, because I think spiritual conflict can seem simple, right?
Mhm.
And I think where we lie politically is going to less align with what we do and more with what we believe. And right now, because we're dealing with politics, what people believe is the greater thing that's at stake. Because yeah, you know what I'm saying?
But
Like
I was just speaking in terms of the way that Ifetayo had worded it. Can a Black Christian have an abortion? But they've been having them. It's
Don't
just
be blaming me, Thandi. Don't be.
Huh?
I said, don't blame me. I said, I'm joking. I said, don't blame me. Okay, but wait a minute. Okay, so from a journalist lens, I'm wondering what you've seen in terms of the conversation. Just actually in two ways. From the general public, and then also you're very involved in political movements. How have you noticed that the conversation has developed over time around abortion, about abortion, reproductive health, reproductive justice as it relates to Black women?
Well, I think one thing that has been a mainstay, which has begun to, for lack of a better word, break within the last few years, is talking about it publicly, talking about the issue of abortion publicly, Black women talking about their quote unquote abortion stories publicly as part of reproductive justice narrative in attempting to keep Roe alive. Sorry, I'm on my phone, so people are calling. So that's one of the things that I've noticed, is that it's because it's always been considered private, but more people are beginning to talk about their experiences in public in order to help change that narrative, in order to share narratives and change the narrative of this.
Okay, so somebody is clearly popular today.
Trying to get up here talking about abortion. Now everybody gonna call. Yeah. So I'm not sure what part got cut off, but yeah. So talking about it more publicly, even though it's considered something private, because of the influence of the church, and all because of the influence of, this is what happens to a woman, and because of the stigma that occurs around women and their bodies. Let's keep this quiet. Don't nobody need to know all that business. The whole stigma and psychosis we have around sex and sexuality, coming from up under white Protestant people, or white Protestant colonizer, for lack of a better word. That is the best word. And so one of the things that I've seen has been, well, that ain't right, Nena. You wrong for that. You wrong. It's my fault because I'm using my phone. But anyway, I'm gonna shut up before somebody else call me. But did you get my point?
You said one of the best things that you've seen.
Well, not so much the best thing, but the main thing that I have seen is that people are talking about this in the Black community a lot more than in the past, are talking about it openly.
Mm-hmm.
Abortion as a right, abortion as a part of reproductive justice, abortion as something that Black women have a right to partake of. It's a medical procedure. It's something that is available to us. We should be able to partake of it. And people's individual abortion stories.
Yeah. Estee, I know that you gotta
go. I think Corrie Bush in St. Louis was one of the most prominent women that spoke publicly about her history, what had happened, her experience, what had happened to her. And I know that there were others, but the names have escaped me at the moment.
Yeah. Estee, I know that you gotta go. Do you have any kind of you dropped a whole bunch on us?
Mm-hmm.
Right there at the beginning. That was a whole lesson in Christian history, Protestant history.
Yeah, and It really is complex, right? Because part of our challenge as African American, I really would say folks, period, because I think we transfer that same ethic to other religious traditions, right? We just become Ifa, and then we're basically as harmful, because what we haven't unlearned is a lack of critical thinking and interrogation in how we approach religiosity. I think we see less of it when people are not practicing a high level of religiosity, which is why I think it's so kind of trendy now for African Americans, particularly among Generation Z, because it's not millennials, we're millennials, and it's the same with us. But it's different, but it's not like what we're seeing in like 20-year-olds, where they're just saying, I'm spiritual and I'm not willing to subscribe to anything. I really want to take a piece of this and a piece of that and kind of find what fits. And so a lot of people are making spiritual trendy, but I think that has its own downsides too. But at least they're asking questions and looking for answers. I think what we really have to talk more about when it comes to religiosity is critical thinking and interrogation. But we have to remember that we lost that in enslavement too. And there's a natural way as African descended folks that we have a connection to God and our ancestors and our practices that really undergirds how we function as people. It's just true, right? And so because that's who we are, I think we combine and compound, right? So we combine that natural impetus to function that way with the now it's me with the phone calls. With that impact of this high religiosity that our enslavers forced us to take on. So we really don't know or have the tools, truthfully, to figure out how to decipher between what my mama said, what the pastor said, what my grandmama told me was right, and how do I make peace with the fact that I really am gonna have this abortion, but does God hate me for doing it because I'm not sure. And so then I'm absolutely not gonna vote in a way that gives other people permission to make the hateful decision that I made about my own body, right? So I think the thing that I would add before I jump off is this. I think this is a critical conversation, particularly as we think about moving forward as a queer woman who will use the technology of the fertility field to be able to carry and mother children. This is a dangerous policy because it has tentacles all over the place that impact straight women and wealthy women and women from all walks of life. I just think that the thing that I want to remind us is to not think that you're exempt because you're past childbearing age, or because you're straight, or because you're married, or because you aren't opposed to having another child, because there are tentacles for the rollout of this and a snowball effect, especially now. You know what I'm saying? When Roe v. Wade was made, we didn't even have DNA tests. So we really think about the difference between 1973 and 2022. This is really, really dangerous policy.
Thank you.
All right.
Reverend Estee. Oh my gosh.
Where's the collection plate?
Huh?
Oh, where's the collection plate?
There's Corrie. I'm gonna add Corrie. Hey, Dr. Corrie.
Oh, sorry, Atlanta traffic wouldn't let me be great, so I
okay, and I want you to go in a second, Corrie. So what Estee said, I really want to kind of just veggie back on that if I can, because when she's talking about these tentacles, let me tell you. So as a psychologist, that particularly when I was doing therapy, specialized in Black women, I done heard people's stories of previous abortions, of contemplating abortion, of just fertility issues, all kinds of things that it has to do with reproductive justice and Black women's reproductive health. And I have sat with women who have struggled. And I think that's the thing that really makes me angry, when you can see the intimate struggle that women have had in making that decision. Also, just on a personal level, I've had sister friends that have confided in me about, you know, you on your third or fourth child, and y'all are struggling, and you're trying to figure out what are you going to do, even though you're married. I mean, there's all kinds of things that, all kinds of reasons why women make these kinds of choices, and that there's this overarching psychological impact.
But none of them are our business.
None of them. None of them. I don't care what the reason is. It's none of our business. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing that I thought of over the weekend. When we look at these laws that are being passed, it's not quite in the heartbeat bill in Georgia, where the majority of us live, but I can see them revising this. As a psychologist, I have conversations with people about abortion and whether or not they're going to do it. Mm-hmm. Or have had those in the past. The kind of work I do now, I don't any longer. But I was just on the phone with my psychologist, my child psychologist, where they, he sees teens. So somebody can, end up pregnant. And so I was saying to my psychologist, well, we have to think about, because they have this portion in the bill where if you aid and abet, then you can also be tried. Mm-hmm. So as a psychologist, that puts me at risk. If I'm talking to someone about abortion in therapy and they can't get an abortion in Georgia, but if I said, oh, well, you can go to such and such, or we're exploring the options of what they're going to do, what's to keep the state from coming and charging me?
Nothing.
And that's the crazy part about it. That's why I said the woman's body is a site of, social problems, right? Because when you think about it, when they talk about therapeutic abortions, they are just looking at the medical aspect of it. The therapeutic abortion is if a woman's life is in danger. But your life can be challenged on other aspects as well. If you have a baby, you could be thrown in emotional danger. If you have a baby, you could be thrown in financial danger. So who's to say, what is really dangerous for a woman to have a child? And if she's not mentally able to have that child, if she just doesn't have the mental bandwidth, why would anyone force someone to have a child?
I'm glad you brought this up, because that's what I was going to say. We're talking about one side of the story, but what about, I've heard a lot of medical professionals such as yourself, Dr. Ojelade, who are saying how this puts them at risk, and to then further put their, patients at risk. So the turmoil that I've heard more than once is, okay, so where is this cutoff for a life is in danger? Because sometimes when a woman miscarries, she does not necessarily immediately expel the fetus. And so if the medical professional removes the fetus, that's considered abortion, technically. And so she's a couple of particular doctors were saying, if the longer I wait, the more I put the patient at risk for sepsis. But if the person is sitting in front of me and they're fine, they don't have sepsis, is the state going to come after me? And I've heard this from the doctor's perspective and from the perspective of women who made the hard decision to have the abortion instead of just, waiting and waiting. One person said they waited a while, like a week or something, and, they were very scared, right, that they would develop sepsis and life-threatening infection and that kind of thing. So, yeah, like Corrie said, I'm sorry, not Corrie, Estee said, this has tentacles in a lot of other arenas. And because you're past childbearing age or whatever, doesn't mean that it, this can't grow into something larger, because it's a curtailing of rights.
Mm-hmm. And my main point too is that the Supreme Court is trying to run a Boston on us, right? Like they have decided that this is how they're going to come and take all of our rights. Like right when this happened, Clarence Thomas says, oh, well, we can look at whether gay people can be married. Oh, we can go back and think about separation of church and state. He didn't mention, Loving versus Virginia, but that's all in this kind of same type of thing. We can tell you whether or not, as a married couple in your own home, if you can use contraception. So we understand that what they're going to do is really use this to test the law. So partly what they're going to test is that kind of, if you go out of state and do this, how can we stop it? So in places like Missouri, so half of the states are saying they are, not going to do it, whatever. They're trying to pass all these really regressive laws. Most of them have to do with privacy. So you go from Georgia to California, they say that in the effort to, make sure that you didn't have an abortion, they can see all of your correspondence, get all of your text messages. They can subpoena anything, like people that you talk to on the way, your Lyft driver, all of this other kind of stuff, so that you don't even have the right to have a conversation with somebody. You don't have the right of, and this is where they got us to interstate travel. I heard y'all mention that before. Like, you don't have the right just to pick up and go. In places like, say, Alabama, Mississippi, I'm sure Georgia is going to reenact their little bounty hunter kind of law. You don't have the right to just decide you're going to go somewhere, say, as a woman and you're 17, and they're going to say, well, you're going to have to take a pregnancy test before you get on the plane. We're going to have to know that you're not going somewhere in order to have an abortion. So what we're going to see next, I think, are those tests of the law, because people put this in place, like in Texas, it's already there, where any random person, anybody can sue you and sue anybody around you because they think that those people are aided and abetted you getting an abortion. Private citizens, all they can do is bring a suit and then be like, yeah, she did it. And I think Ife told her that it was a good idea. And I think she took her Lyft to the airport. And I'm going to sue Delta Airlines because Delta flew her to da-da-da-da. And so it'll be interesting how we are going to see these cases. And they've already, in cases where people had miscarriages, like in Indiana and some other places, have sued people because they did not believe they had a miscarriage. So they went through, again, all their texts, subpoenaed all of their records on their text messages and et cetera, to see if, in fact, maybe they're lying and it wasn't really that. So we're in a really interesting and dangerous place, because literally all of our privacy, all the 14th Amendment freedoms, equal protection under the law, that's all gone.
And it's crazy because they did something similar in 1870 with Anthony Comstock and the Comstock laws. I know Dr. McCray, we were talking about that a little bit earlier. He was the Postmaster General, and he was doing something similar back in 1870s, reading people's mails. If you mentioned contraceptives, you would get arrested. They say in his career, he arrested 4,000 people at least, caused 15 people to commit suicide. And he was very loved and idolized by J. Edgar Hoover. So you know what type of person he was.
I try not to make comparisons too often, but these are the tentacles, excuse me, not testicles. These are the tentacles that it has to do with testicles, but these are the tentacles that Estee was talking about. But if you just listening to Corrie, I cannot help but think about the Fugitive Slave Act and how all white people were deputized and had a duty, a responsibility, and it was expected that they turn in black folks that they suspected of being runaway slaves in areas that were far away from quote unquote the slaveholding states. So, I'm in California. We got it lit out here. You could be out here visiting, decide to stay at my house, and somebody could come trying to find out what we discussed. If I drove you someplace, if I pointed you in a particular direction, direction if I allowed you to come and take a nap after the procedure, but before you got on the plane to go home. It's ridiculous. And this is why we have to, I don't want to say take it out of the moral issue. We can't take it out completely. There is a dimension of morality that we can talk about, but it's not the only one. This is nothing more than a power grab. Everything that Corrie just said has absolutely nothing to do with pro-life. It has nothing to do with the quality of life of the child. Once that fetus becomes a child and once that fetus enters outside, and the hell that they live in here on earth, none of that gets discussed, and none of this is going to be addressed by anything that has just happened. So it's a naked power grab, a naked power move. Again, agreeing with you. I always forget which name, Grand Tressa, which name I'm gonna call you. This is about the woman's body. It is the woman, and not so much about it is the woman that is the problem. That's why
the woman that is the problem.
The woman has to be controlled.
And that's that. We're talking about it from that perspective, but I think we would be remiss not to look at it from multiple angles, because we're talking about men, but men have tended to be the face of this anti-feminist, anti-abortion movement. But actually, some statistics say 3/4 of the grassroots supporters have been women. And don't let them fool you. A lot of the most vociferous women, dating back to like a Phyllis Schlafly of the 1970s, right? Even though they are operating within the context that we could read as feminist, right? They are, Schlafly was like a lawyer and a working mother of 6, right? But she would talk about this and play to, I guess, this building this base of resistance in a different way. It wasn't about men's control of women. It was about how feminism was undercutting women's fundamental right to be women. And so in pushing this idea of individualism and extreme equality, which some people balk at, right? Men and women are different, and I like our differences and I respect our differences, right? And in that defining of difference, they would say, and we have certain privileges that feminism wants to undermine. And this Roe v. Wade, this legalization of abortion is the really most extreme version of this kind of individualism that takes away the woman's sacredness in childbirth and puts the individual over the community, which deserves, this gift that she is bestowed in bringing life to the world. So I think if we're going to really effectively resist this, then we've got to look at it from more than one perspective. And it's not just in some people's minds about male dominance and control over women's individual rights.
And I think the interesting part, when you look at feminists back in the 1870s, they had the opposite argument, right? In the 1970s, it became about the woman being loose, and it was about controlling female sexuality. That's what the second or third wave feminists considered it as. But the early feminists, they viewed abortion, and they were definitely making sure that they wanted to make abortion illegal, because they said that if a woman got abortions, then that would free the man of their lust. So they were saying that the abortions was, men were pushing women to get abortions because they couldn't control themselves sexually. Then 100 years later, women are getting abortions because, they couldn't control themselves sexually. So the whole thing, when you look at abortion, is you really, really have to, the abortion issue is really a barometer of what society and culture is reading as a woman at the time. What makes a woman? How are women determined? How are women defined? So, that's why it changes every so often.
I think we need to, what I want to point out is we ain't talking none about where do we go from here.
No.
we talked about the travel.
Organize. Yeah, and educate, agitate, organize.
Yeah, she said early.
Okay, no, you did say that. I mean, I think about it.
Impeach Clarence Thomas. We need to, first of all, we should have done that a long time ago. We need to expand the Supreme Court and stop messing with some Joe Biden. And I'm not trying to hear some mansion in cinema. I don't care. We need to figure out a way, because what I'm very clear about is, again, this is not, we can't just take it out of context. And what they've already said, because like I said, they've been on a clip. Like, I think that the next judgment that they did about the sort of separation of church and state, where the Supreme Court ruled in the favor of this coach in Washington State who wanted to pray, force his students to pray in the like after a game or for it, they ruled in his favor. Like, we're in a different sort of thing. They're trying to say whatever you thought it is, we're going to make sure we can go back on that. Right. So I think that right now, vote in your local elections, because, people talk about, oh, well, it's only some states. Look here. You're talking about wherever the fugitive slave law is a good example. Like, we cannot have any kind of interpretation where you're going to leave it up to these same raggedy states. Virginia just became Republican. All of these other kind of things just did. And so anything that the Democrats passed, they've quickly turned over, right? Because they had universal health care, and they changed the voting laws for felons or people convicted of felonies. Virginia did that. Their new Republicans are trying to quickly reverse it. And so we need to be very clear that in these local elections, we cannot play. I don't care if you don't believe voting changes anything. Well, you gonna believe that, but you still take your behind to the polls. I don't care if you don't vote for the president or whatever, but you need to vote for all of them down ballot, whatever, the Secretary of State, do some research, figure out who they are, and basically do not vote for any Republican in any state election anywhere in the United States. That's what we need to make sure we do.
Ever.
And
we need to resist. We have to resist. We have to resist, and we have to resist, and we have to resist.
Trump was illegitimate. Them 3 justices, and I cannot believe. You might say what you want about Hillary Clinton, but she was absolutely right. We let that little old fool put 3 ridiculous people on the Supreme Court. And when we said, the democracy is on the ballot in 2016, people were like, no, it's not. No, it really was. And she was not lying. So, but either until we can expand the Supreme Court, I think we need to say they were illegitimately placed on there. So maybe do that too.
Okay.
But before we can get there, I think so when I'll just say I did some work 4 years ago around local and state level elections, and I got to put time on my plate to do that again, because before we can say go vote, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to help people to be able to vote, to help people get registered, to help people understand what kinds of resistance that the opposing forces are putting up and how to navigate and maneuver that, because some very politically aware people were blocked from voting 4 years ago, right? And so phone banking, going door to door, I did that, and we all are going to have to do that this year. I don't feel the excitement this year that I felt 4 years ago. We all need to be doing that stuff. And that goes for everybody on this call, everybody who's listening, everybody who will look at it before. You've got to get politically active and organized. Host parties, election parties, host voting registration parties in your home, at your church. Host what I did 4 or 5 years ago was host a film screening about suppress the fight to vote.
I didn't get invited, but we'll keep on going.
It was directed at you. It was directed at people who were like, oh my gosh, this is what voter suppression is? I thought you were just forcing this information about the grandfather clause down our throat. And we thought it was a long time ago, right? To help, people who might be like, I don't have time. I was going to vote, but I had to work and I wasn't going to make a way. we have a lot of grassroots ground level work to do, because if you look at the opposition, that the opposing forces, the backlash that was formed around these things like Roe v. Wade and the civil rights gains of the 1960s, they lobbied, they protested outside clinics. Hell, I'm not advocating this. I'm just giving y'all information, right? They bombed
clinics and assassinated doctors.
Up against. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Assassinated doctors.
And I think let me connect with that. I see Dr. Gamble out in California with you, Thandi, that's on, and I think for my my family that's out in California, which is a Democratic state, and it's just a Democratic stronghold, it's not to assume that the Democrats will have your back.
Right.
Because a Democrat, I mean, so I'm with you before you get on me, Corrie. I'm with you in terms of voting.
Don't vote Republican. Let's go back and roll the tape back.
Okay, yeah, you did say don't vote Republican. I mean, doing that down, I think that doing that down ballot voting is critical. And I have a PhD, and sometimes I'm walking in the voting booth and I don't know what the hell is going on. When I'm reading that ballot, there was a ton of judges on there this last time. I did not know anything about any of these judges, and I'm like, where is the black slate? So whether that be in California, where Thandi is, and my colleague Dr. Gamble, where are the black slates that they used to be, where you could just know, you could go in and be like, okay, here are the people. Okay, well, tell me, Dr. McCray.
But they have an app though.
The times have changed. There's no black slate. So then what I feel like we need to do is, like I said, we should have all, if you didn't know all the judges and I didn't know all the judges, we should have all been meeting over lunch saying, let's go over this ballot, girl. We should have a habit of going over the ballot together early, because there's no black slate, because we know this.
Okay, so then my question is, then when do we do that? When do we have the lunch? When do we have the YouTube or the live stream conversation? Because I need to know. Judges are critical. And what I did is I skipped over all the judges because I didn't have information. Now, the election before, I texted an attorney that I know and knew, and it, like, let's say there was 20 judges on there. He gave me 2 to vote for. That's it. But we need to have some kind of systematic way to know who to vote for, who's got our best interests at heart, number one. And number two, you know, this half of us on here have children that are of voting age. And I think we also need to make sure that our children are voting. So I know that I'll tell a joke in a second. I'm just like, okay, so you know there's an election, and she'll say, sometimes she'll be like, well, who to vote for? And so I will take her through like how to look at the ballot ahead of time. But we need to make sure that we're doing that, but not just voting. I think voting is one aspect.
Absolutely. It is not the only aspect. And can we please donate to abortion funds? Can we please make a donation? Can we please donate to these abortion funds? Can we please donate some money to these abortion funds? Last Friday morning, the decision came out. I had no idea this was going to happen, but Thursday night, I watched a documentary called The Janes on HBO. If you have not seen it, you need to see how this network of women, predominantly white, provided safe abortions to women seeking them in Chicago prior to Roe v. Wade, because before that, not only was it illegal, but the mafia was running abortions, charging women exorbitant, ridiculous prices for back alley abortions.
Wow.
Oh my God.
The mafia.
I did not know that. Okay, here's another thing.
But one thing I wanted to veggie back on the trying to find out who to vote for. I don't know if it's because the county that I live in, when we go vote, we're giving a little QR code that you can scan, and it takes you to an app, and it gives you the background information of everyone in that election. So you can sit there and you can read. And I know this time I saw a couple of people who were Morehouse graduates that were running for judges in this area. So Boom, check that one.
Don't do it.
They would give you the history, they would give you the background, all of those types. They have the pictures, they'll have their policies, and you can make an educated choice. And we basically stepped out of line, me and the girls, scanned it and read and came up with a strategy of who we were going to vote for.
I don't think that's a good strategy, because when you get there, if you wait until you get there, it could be overwhelming, like Ifetayo is saying, too much for you to read on the spot. And we're not just voting for a random Morehouse grad. I was saying don't do it, not because I don't love Morehouse men. I'm married to a man who I met when he was a student at Morehouse. But that's where Herman Cain went.
No, I'm not saying just vote. That's not what I'm not saying just vote for somebody just because they went for Morehouse. I think that's just like very crazy. But you have the background, you have their policies, you have their stance. And if you have time, if you're not like, oh, I got to vote between, going to this place or to this other place, if you have some time that you can just sit and dedicate to it, and if you have some time to get the app beforehand, of course, and read up on the people, that's a quick and easy way for you to figure out who's who. Because the question wasn't like, how are we going to do it? The question was, how do we find out about more information about the people who are running? And one of the ways that you find out more information about the people who are running is to check and see if your county has something like that, a general website that lists in one place the people's policies, backgrounds, and information.
They don't. So send us the little thing. But okay, so two things.
Be able to run their own elections, and they've been hot. Them people have been terrorizing them. So no, we do not in Fulton County, but that doesn't mean we can't create it.
Right. But. Okay. So a couple of things. Okay. So Dr. Campbell says that they're watching from San Diego State's Black Resource Center. So, hey, Dr. Campbell. Hey, everybody at the Black Resource Center at San Diego State. Woohoo! Okay. So there is a question here that I think is important. Weada Freeman is asking a question, but there was something else.
Hey, Weada.
I wanted to say something though about
Hey girl, hey.
Gosh, I don't even remember because I wanted this question to be the end question. But okay, so I'm gonna put this out there. So there is an abortion as Black genocide discourse in our community. How do we come to terms with that as we seek to protect reproductive autonomy? And so I'm going to add to that question. Nozibele, can I mention the question that you posted in our group the other day?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so then there's another question. If you take that from a spiritual perspective, some people will make the argument that having an abortion is like, so if we believe in ancestors and ancestors are able to return to this physical life, some people see abortion as getting rid of an ancestor that is trying to return. So how do we think about this? I'm wondering your thoughts about those two things, and how do we protect Black women's reproductive rights and reproductive health and think about reproductive justice when these are very real pieces of the conversation? Because let's be clear, the Supreme Court did not overturn that decision to protect Black life. It did not. That's not what happened.
We're unlike some people who hate Black women and are not convinced that we can think for ourselves, that we just blindly follow white women. We understand that there's a birth dearth. We understand that white folks are not reproducing. They've been the minority on the planet, as Dr. Welsing taught us, for a very, very long time, and now they're not reproducing. So we're clear that they were not doing this for us. Unlike what some people might think, we know they weren't doing this for us. But what we don't really know, I don't think, what we don't really talk about is the fact that abortion is a medical procedure that should not be criminalized. If you don't want it to partake of it, then educate people not to partake of it. Because when you start talking about genocide, you're following white Republican talking points. Where's this notion? Where does it come from that we was over in Africa just butt naked, living off the earth, eating herbs and fruits and just reproducing ridiculously? No, our midwives, our quote unquote doulas, our priests and priestesses not only knew about fertility, they also knew how to terminate a pregnancy. Our divination talks about what to do if this child should come now, if this ancestor should come back now. And if it is blocked from coming now, this is the ceremony or the ritual that you deal with to make peace with that spirit. That spirit can come back at some other point in time. So it's a couple of things that we got going on here. You know, we know how to terminate pregnancies long before the first white person crawled out of Europe. That's first of all. Second of all, when it comes to ancestors being returning, are we killing an ancestor? An ancestor returns, i.e., after they have passed on. So if they've passed on from a car accident, from a gunshot, or for an abortion, you saying they can't come back from an abortion, but they can come back from a car wreck? Really? See, that sounds like some Protestant Christianity being injected into.
I don't know. I interpret that differently in terms of,
and that's the beauty of it.
From my perspective as a voodoo priestess, when we talk about ancestors returning, of course, you know, a lot of times when people look at spirituality, even the most nationalistic, even the most trained African minds, because of the way a lot of us were socialized, we still interpret it through the lens of a European idea and mindset, especially in time. Because when you talk about these things, the pathways, most European pathways to the divine or to the end of the life is linear, right? African people, we recognize that our pathways are multilinear. We have all these different roads. And if you choose this road, then of course you have different actions. You're going to have different roads that branch off as a result of that choice, right? And so let's say if you choose to go right, you're going to have branches for that. If you choose to go left, you have branches of that. And those branches don't always intersect and intermingle. So if you choose a left branch that says, okay, I'm going to terminate, you know, this ancestor, and you go along this branch, then that branch or that particular pathway that you have for that person return may not be there. Because it's not a straight road, and it's not guaranteed, and it's not something that is going to happen. Looking at something, because, you know, I had this conversation with my daughters, and this is why we started talking about it, because they said that if something is going to happen, it's going to happen. That's not necessarily true from an African standpoint. When you look at it, and because when you think about it, the voodoo teachers, and, you know, like, we'll get into the different perspectives. I'm just speaking from my perspective. When you make a child, you have different combinations that come from you have some ashe that's coming from the father line. You have ashe that's coming from the mother line. Then you have your particular ashe that you carry. And all those things go in to make a baby. It's like the right combination at the right time. And if you get that right combination at the right time of these specific ingredients, and then you decide to do something else, you can get another combination of different ingredients, but it's not going to be the same. Now, let's be clear. Let's be clear. And I don't want anyone to misinterpret my words. I believe a woman has the right to do whatever she wants with her body, right? Whatever choice you have, whatever you believe between you and your God, that's between you and your God, that's between you and your body, that's your choice to make. Now, even though that's the way that we look at the conception of life from the voodoo's perspective, it's nothing there that says that, okay, you have to carry on with this baby. Right? It's nothing that says that you cannot have an abortion. Even though, you know, Thandi and Ife, you also know that there are some certain Odus that says if you are pregnant, you cannot abort. That is in Odu specifically.
But there's also ones where the priest would give you herbs because that particular spirit should not come back.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. There's both ways to look at that, right? So because there are multiple ways to look at it, I like to resist the idea of there's one way, You know what I'm saying? That I like to resist the idea of, or push back on the idea that an ancestor is going to be born no matter what, because that's not necessarily true.
I didn't
I
say
like
that.
that.
I'm
me.
not saying that you
No,
said that. I'm just pointing
I'm
that
saying,
out, because
but
that's what
I
I
agree.
said.
There's
That's the
more than one way-
conversation
more
that I
than one
have
way
with
to
my
look at
young
it.
girls and their young understanding of it. You know, like my 16-year-old, it's destiny. They're gonna come anyway. So
They're not young girls. I would like to put my opinion in it. They're not young girls. They're young ladies. just in case people watching think that you're talking to 4-year-olds, you're not. You're talking. I know in your heart they're still the arm babies that we saw at the beginning. But with that being said, I'm probably less religious than a lot of people on the panel, and I think of what Sister Freeman said from a nationalist kind of philosophical perspective. And my takeaway from the conversation is that anybody out there who is a part of any religious, political, social orientation that does not allow you to ask these types of questions and have these types of conversations, go the other way. There should not be, as it has been displayed here, one way given to you to think about a particular topic. And the world we live in, our situations are very dynamic. And at the very least, let's sit down and have the conversation. And I appreciate what Sister Chimurenga said, that we're talking about the access to a medicalized process, conversations with medical professionals that are not illegal for the person, the woman, the family that's thinking about this, or the medical professional. That's what we're talking about. So if in our particular group,
and psychologists,
I'm considering psychologists medical professionals. I may be wrong. I'm sorry, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking of in the whole scheme of things. And if in our family, if in our group we talked, and women's voices are heard and considered, and we understand that women have a right to make choices about their body, and that their body doesn't belong to the nation as a whole, in particular, male-dominated nation. Then,
all right, now
I got to sign off.
Everybody knows that, you know, like I'm not just wholehearted, like, yeah, everybody kill your own fetuses. That's great, genocide for everybody. That's not me. But what I'm saying is, don't be in a group that doesn't allow you to think for yourself and that thwarts these types of conversations. My studies are on, like I said before, cultural nationalists, and I had some very, very fruitful, interesting conversations with women who were thinking back on what went on in some of these organizations, but both toward what Sister Freeman was saying about abortion as genocide, right? And birth control is genocide, and situations where people were like, but we have communal childcare, we have communal food situations, and we know how much food we can afford, how many beds we have in communal childcare, and in our communal housing, we don't have enough. Sister, you're on your 6th child, will you have an abortion? Will you consider having an abortion? That there were conversations like that. And the issue, the larger issue we talked about was when the women didn't have bodily autonomy, when none whatsoever, when their bodies, like you're saying, were looked at as a problem that needed to be solved for the entire nation, by the entire nation, not according to her own will as well and her family's considerations. So that's all I had to say.
So the issue of genocide, the issue of genocide comes about in these particularly Black nationalist spaces or nationalistic type spaces when we talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Universal Declaration on Genocide. In implementing, when states, governments implement measures intended to stop births or limit births within a group. Now, the legal medical procedure known as abortion is keeping it legal is different from sterilizing women in Puerto Rico. It's different from sterilizing women in prisons. It's different from the state of Mississippi, de facto or otherwise, performing the Mississippi appendectomies, where sisters go in for one thing, and regardless of what they went in for, they come out having hysterectomies. So there's a difference. And so what's happened now with this rollback with Roe v. Wade, the state has intruded into personal lives. This medical procedure has now become criminalized, and all of us run the risk of being placed into the hairs of the criminal justice system when we didn't need to be. Increased surveillance for those of us, quote unquote, on the outside. What about people who are already on the inside? People who might be pregnant in county jails, in city jails, in federal institutions, in detention centers. It's going back to what Estee said, it's tentacles all over the place. But in particular, the question of it being genocide or not, bringing about measures intended to prevent births within the group. A lot of us follow that argument for a while in terms of abortion. But again, I'm looking at it from the standpoint, number one, of this is a medical procedure that should remain legal and safe as opposed to criminalized. And also, we have terminated pregnancies long before we came into white folks. And that's what an abortion is. It's a way to terminate a pregnancy. I also believe that as our community, we need to talk about the full range of reproductive options. Abortion is simply one. So why is it that within this full range, this one particular one becomes criminalized? Well, actually, based upon your boy Clarence Thomas, he's about to criminalize contraception also. So it's a problem. It's all problematic. I don't see it as genocide, and I think more sisters and more brothers need to look at this from that particular perspective.
Corrie,
and that's all I was going to say. What's your definition of genocide? If you're not calling the criminal justice system genocide, then what are we even talking about? Because at the end of the day, how are you going to be for the death penalty and against abortion? There has to be this kind of, I think, discussion, because, far more, and I don't heard said, but most women in America who have abortions already have children. So they are making the decision where they say, I cannot figure out how we will not all be on the street if I have another baby. I cannot, or I was assaulted and I am making the decision not to. Or my husband is full crazy, because really the time when most women are murdered in the United States is when they are pregnant. It is literally dangerous. You are more likely to be shot and killed by somebody you thought you loved because you are pregnant and they don't want to have that baby. What was that football player who hit out
Ruth? Ray Caruth.
Right? And in Atlanta, this woman who was pregnant shot at the daggone gas station, but you find out it's a man who just don't want to have a baby. He married to somebody else. So we need to be very careful when we're talking about genocide. Women are risking their lives when they are pregnant, their livelihood, their lives, and often for the critics of abortion, when they are not doing anything to fix the problem. Right. So if we are at that moment of danger, if we are having economic problems, well, okay, player, what you going to do to fix it? So that's all I have to say on that level. And back to the discussion about whether or not this is preventing the ancestors to come back. And I think this is an interesting conversation, because I'm like, you can't, just because somebody died doesn't mean they're dead. Right. And that's one of the things I know from my African understanding. Right. We're acting like, also, even if you do something in this life, what makes you think your magic is stronger than theirs, right? What makes you think you're more powerful than your ancestor? Like and also birth from a baby is not the only way they can come back. You can have a visitation of spirits. Spirits can embody different things. There are all kinds of rituals, in my understanding, from these Gullah Geechee people that you can do that has to do with ancestors and how they live and manifest on this earth. That does not necessarily mean they have to be born through a child and then go through that whole cycle again. So I think that what we are talking about is, not really, we think, and that's our own. When I say we, even these people who are making decisions about other people, we think we are more powerful than God. We think that we are more powerful than our ancestors. We think that we can prevent. What I'm saying? Like, if we're going to be great, we're going to be great. And I think that is what we need to remember. But anyway, that's what I got to say.
Oh, gosh. Okay, so I got several points. One is the story that you just said, Corrie, reminded me of someone in my family. And it's an offline story, not to say, but that exact kind of situation of finding yourself pregnant and then the person you're with not necessarily being happy, and people, women can be harmed.
Yes.
As women have harmed. And we're not thinking about that at all. The other thing that I will share, when I got initiated, one of my last initiations, I was past 40 and clearing it day in at divination. And I had gotten something right before I got initiated too. And it's like, oh, there's another baby coming. Nah, shawty. Not with these 20-year-olds that I... No, got a PhD, got the folks, they can take care of themselves.
Why are you yelling? No, why are you yelling?
Because that's the way I felt. That is the way that I felt. And anybody that has had them children close together and you finally get them to the point where they're in college, that's the way I felt. And what was interesting to me is they said, y'all, I was trying to fight this wasp when I went on. And now it's like, yeah, I'm going to try to look at the wasp while I say this thing. The interesting thing that they told me was like, okay, so if you don't want to have this child's going to come through your children. So just be clear about that, because its ancestor is persistent and wants to come back. So I know from an E5 perspective that's the message that I got. So I took that very seriously, and it's like, all right, y'all, let's have a powwow about how things need to go down.
Let me tell y'all about this baby you gonna have.
Because I'm like, it ain't coming through. Not over 40. No, not gonna happen. Well, so that's the one thing that I want to say. The other thing that I wanted to kind of go back to when I was like, what can we do? Because we said that this was about where can we go from here? And I thought about this from an employer perspective. And I saw some big corporations like saying this, how they would help and stuff. And they got all kinds of legal budgets. I think simple things, like for myself as a small business owner that definitely employs people, or, for those that are in management positions, is simply making sure that if you have people that report to you, that you ensure that you approve their time off so they can go and take care of their business. So if they have to travel and go someplace else, you don't have to ask a lot of questions, and you don't need to, get all in their business. But if people need to go and take care of a medical procedure, that you don't get in the way of that. Right. I think that's like a basic thing that you can do. The other thing that I think, and I will, we haven't really pulled the brothers too much in this conversation, is that what brothers can do is remember that vasectomies are reversible. And so Black men having vasectomies early, and then when you have sons, encouraging them to go get a vasectomy early, and then when they're ready to have children, they can have that reversed. I think that is something that is critical. And so then it takes away, because for years, Black women have been the ones that are primarily responsible about birth control. We either got to get an IUD, or we're taking a pill, or we're putting something up there. We're doing all these kinds of things.
We're doing all the work.
We are doing all the work.
As other areas of life, we're doing all the work.
And a vasectomy is an outpatient procedure. So you can go and get this done and have it reversed when you're ready to have your kids. And so we need to have that as part of the conversation. The other thing is, when we think about going back to what you were saying, Thandi, you're right. Our introduction to white folks is not our introduction to birth control. No. Our folks have known how to manage reproductive health and to stop pregnancies that did not need to come for a long time. Even when you think about waist beads. Side note, for all your young people that's wearing your waist beads outside your clothes, waist beads go under the clothes, but that's a whole other thing.
Focus.
Wait, I'm sorry. Waist beads have been one of the ways that people would help to manage to track their reproductive cycle and their reproductive health and their ovulation. They're used for a fashion statement now, which is a whole different thing. But I think we need to really understand that Black women for a long time have been doing things without the permission of white people to be able to manage our reproductive health. And then
women have been doing things without the permission of men, which is why they mad in the first place, but okay.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah. And then the other thing, my final thing is the conversation to Sister Waithe, when you're talking about this whole thing about abortion being genocide. I have heard that, and I've heard that in Black nationalist circles, if you will. But then I also I've had in my neighborhood these right to life or pro-lifers that put billboards up, white folks putting billboards up. And so when I start seeing white people promoting some shit, I know I'm going in a different direction. When you have, I'm like, okay, something's wrong here. So
is that Project 21 that was doing that? The most dangerous place for a Black child is in the womb. I think that was their tagline a few years ago.
I mean, I know that people got mad here, and then like I saw the billboard for a little bit of time, and then it disappeared. But I know there's a lot of things. It's kind of like, to me, I equate it to, I think the easiest example is when I started you hear all those white supremacists being anti-vaccine. I was like, oh, let me go get one of them vaccines, because then I'm not trying I don't want to align with anything. Any of crazy. I don't want to align with it at all. And I think that in terms of kind of critical thinking skills, going back to what Estee said earlier, that's one of the things that we have to consider is when you start seeing your nationalist rhetoric aligning with the pro-life people and the white supremacists or the white nationalists, like they call it, if your stuff aligns with what they're saying,
there's a problem.
Then there's something wrong.
There's something very, very wrong.
Oh, wow. I thought of it totally differently.
How'd you think of it? You be the last word.
Well, a lot of times we position, because of white supremacy, position Black nationalism as radical. When in actuality, when we look at it, it has, like a lot of forms of nationalism, very conservative impulses. So that's why I was like, so then that's when the critical thinking and the ability to ask questions should tell you whether you're in a nationalist organization or whether you're in a cult.
Hey.
And so I don't know that does this overlap with white, folks' ideology is a strong enough litmus test. I think it might be like a weather vane, but I don't know that it is, because often it is going to overlap in certain, meta ways. Because if we take out the, white supremacist gaze, a lot of what we're doing is conservative, right?
And I guess, I think I'm from a different perspective. Yes. So what we know of, like these people that call themselves conservatives, they're white supremacists. Period. I really don't like when people say
they're trying to conserve.
Politically conservative, because they're really talking about white supremacy. In terms of conservative values, when you look at your grandmama and them and your auntie and them, those are conservative people. that is totally different than what they're talking about. Because we know that in terms of Black people, we tend to be economically liberal, but very socially conservative. That's a totally different way of looking at the world. What I'm more seeing is, I think I was very shocked and disturbed when I would just watch like little things about these white supremacists, and they want to be vegan and eat organic food and not get vaccines, and they don't really trust the government. They want to have these all natural lives, and there's a lot of overlap when you look at Black nationalist movements and the rhetoric that comes out of that, and white supremacist movements and the rhetoric that comes there. It is really scary how it overlaps. And it's not about conservatism. It's about like people not thinking critically about stuff and not really having individual thought about stuff. And if I can add in what an ancestor would say, my grandfather, who's speaking to me right now, my grandfather always reminds me, it comes from Nazism, a lot of that stuff. I mean, it goes further than that, but you can see a lot of it in some of that Nazist rhetoric where Hitler was talking about, like, just continue to have babies for the movement. You got to have as many blonde hair and blue-eyed babies for the movement. And so I see a lot of that stuff, and it really makes me scared.
Yeah, I think it's a lot. Right, but what Eldridge Cleaver and all of the sort of early patriarchal Black, Panthers were like, the only place for a Black woman is prone, right, in the movement. Right? That's all they can do is lay down.
Didn't they say you didn't say that? Stokely Carmichael?
Carmichael said he was even serious when he said it. It was a joke, but
what we get on about all the people Dave Chappelle making jokes. But like I said, it was also serious in that we have an understanding of how Black women were treated in the Black. So this is not something new, right? Like, so you read Erica, all these other people. So we know, even though women were doing all this other kind of stuff, that doesn't mean that they were treating them like equal. We know that there was a sort of sense of all civil rights movements in the United States that a lot of them did not deal with their patriarchy. And there was a sense that women, being a mother of the movement, as they call a lot of people, even the way they talked about Fannie Lou Hamer, still put them in this kind of role. Like, I would say Fannie Lou Hamer was a warrior of the movement, right? But that's not the way in which we talk about women, I think, ultimately. But I do think that it has to do with when we talk about, these kind of conservative values, whenever you want to have women in certain roles, even if they sound seductive because it's like these this is like back to nature. This is how it was intended. It still is mad problematic. So
it's oppressive. In many ways, it's oppressive. I'm going to have to jump off. That don't mean y'all got to leave.
No, we're gonna leave.
See, whenever somebody says that, everybody's like, okay, we got to go. But I just want to send a shout out because all of y'all are in Atlanta. I would be remiss if I did not say the name Sister Song, Reproductive Justice. Sister Song. It's headquartered right there in Atlanta. I believe they're in New Orleans over the weekend, convening some reproductive justice roundtables and discussions. But when they get back, they come into Atlanta. Please look up Sister Song for ways that people can help resist this latest overturning, this latest attack on Black women and our bodily autonomy and one of our quote unquote freedoms, our democratic rights. Please look up Sister Song. Please donate to abortion funds. It's unfortunate that I cannot name not a one right now, but if you check with Sister Song, I know they got you. So please do that, please.
And if you like, yes, thank you, Thandi. I appreciate you. I put Sister Song in, and then also if you look online, because I've had several organizations that have asked for funding, so you can definitely do that. The other thing, really quick, that we haven't addressed, and we won't address it now, but Sister Waithe, isn't that your I'll say sister? Okay. It's like, wait a minute, your name looks familiar. Okay, hey girl. The other thing that we didn't address is that our Muslim and Jewish sisters, where in terms of their religious teachings, they can have abortions. And so we've been focused kind of like we talked about Christianity at the beginning and then kind of African spiritual systems, but also like when we think about Muslim women, when we think about Jewish women, that is part of their religious tradition. And so this overturning of Roe v. Wade is part of, again, that Judeo-Christian white supremacist perspective, because it's not thinking about fully other people's religious perspectives and trying to be about specifically control of Black women's bodies or women's bodies in general. And as we're talking about it, we're talking about Black women's bodies. On that note, I just want to say thank you to all of my sisters coming and hanging out. We said we were going to take vacation and then this happened. And so we had to come on and talk. My sister that is a social commentator and a journalist, Thandisizwe Chimurenga, is up there. She's going to say goodbye. Dr. Kenja McCray, who is an associate professor of history. Then my other sister, who is the owner of Grand Tressa and also an anthropologist, Kaumba Nozibele in Cebu. Did I cover all the names?
Yeah, I lose track.
That's enough.
And then our associate professor of literature, particularly African-American literature at Morehouse College, Dr. Corrie Claiborne. And Dr. Claiborne gave us a reading list. So you guys have a charge. I put the reading list down. So continue reading, continue donating, like Thandi said, to organizations that are funding abortions, continue to understand and read and learn about and be in conversation specifically about reproductive justice, because it's not just about abortion. It is really about women having the right to control their body. We'll talk to y'all soon. We're going to take off next month for August, unless the Supreme Court does something else that's crazy that impacts Black women.
Something else crazy. Although I think they're on a break until October, so let's just hope they don't.
Okay.
And enjoy Black August.
Enjoy Black August. Yes. And again, celebrate the fact that an enemy to Black women is going to jail for 30 years. So y'all take care.
All right, y'all. Peace. Love y'all.
Peace. Love you.
Peace and chicken grease.
Right.